The next item is the event initial report regarding the heavy water release on April 26, 2016 at the Z2 Research Reactor at Chalk River Laboratories, as outlined in CMD 16 M28 and 16 M28A. Ms. Tadros, you still have the floor.
Thank you, sir. So yes, Haiti Tadros for the record. I am with Mr. Jean Leclerc, and we are available to take any questions you may have on this particular event.
Dr. McEwen?
Thank you. So I guess one of the things that wasn't entirely clear to me in your CMD 28A is you haven't really answered the question that was in the EIR, a possible gap in CNL's human performance management. So was that in fact the case in this? Because it certainly looks as if there would be an issue in individual performance.
Jean Leclerc for the record. So with regards to human performance, I think the issue we're dealing with here is actually the work instructions needing to be put in place to have clarity with regards to those final steps when they're dumping the heavy water from the reactor. So in this particular incident, we have 3 isolation valves that were closed too early in the process. This is a fairly routine activity. It's as it's noted, it's a fairly low-risk facility. There's 3 or 4 operators. It's a research reactor, so historically it's been operated by the training of the operators who just routinely do this on a regular basis. So in this particular case, the one step was done too early. So part of the things that CNL has been focusing on actually is putting in place an operator manual and actual written instructions to ensure that those steps are followed. So that's the human performance element in this particular case, is to ensure clarity on the steps that need to be followed and when they need to be completed.
So the obvious question is, this facility is, just heard, 60 years old. We haven't had that type of SOP in place until now?
Perhaps I can get CNL to answer with regards to their procedures and their operating manual.
It's Bill Pilkington for the record, and to address this question, I have with me Mr. Brock Sanderson, who is the facility authority for the Z2 reactor. So I'd ask Brock to answer the question.
Brock Sanderson for the record. So yes, the Z2 reactor has been in operation for roughly 60 years. We do have an operating manual that is in place and a full suite of conduct of operations as well as operating procedures. The gap that we identified here was that we did not have specific valving instructions for the operation of these 3 isolation valves associated with the 3 dump tanks. And it has been, the operation of those valves has been done by a skill of the craft operator knowledge instead of specific operating instructions. That was deemed as a weakness, and we have since corrected that weakness in the facility.
Thank you. Monsieur Hervé.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. What is the, at the moment there is some heavy water in the dump tank ventilation duct work. What is the nature of the risk? In that case, I think there is no effect, but if the amount of water have been higher than what could have been the nature of the risk?
Thank you. Jean Leclerc for the record. The risk is actually very, very low. because of the nature of this subcritical assembly, this reactor, the energy level is very, very low. The tritium concentrations in the heavy water are very low and will remain very low by the very nature of the experiments that are being conducted in the operation itself. So the releases into the environment, releases in the work environment from tritium would be very low, as noted by CNSC staff. So even if you had a significantly more heavy water released, the consequences and the overall risk would still remain quite low.
Even if a significant amount of water is there for a long period of time.
That would be correct.
Thank you. Mr. Tagliasi?
I have two. In one, you have two different figures. In event initial report, you are talking about the 1.2% evaporation, which is 320 liters, and on M28A, you are talking about just a half. So what's the difference? And when you are considering 20 liters evaporation per month, this was discovered in quarterly report, which is 3 months. The 3 months times 20 is 60 liters, and you lost 160 at least. So it's something which doesn't match.
So just to clarify, the total amount released relative to the total amount that's in inventory is fairly small. The other thing, the difference between the initial report and the report we provided to the Commission is they were actually able to recover a fair amount of the heavy water that they found in the ventilation system. So they recovered a fairly significant portion of it, and the end result was that the total amount that they now estimated as being lost was a fraction of what they originally estimated.
And my second question is...
Before you leave that question, how do you recover heavy water from ventilation? I'm curious about this. Anybody can give us a 10-second clip on that?
It's a liquid in ducts.
So I would ask CNL should probably answer that question, but...
It's Brock Sanderson for the record. Yes, the liquid itself is in the ventilation system for the dump tank, and once we noted that there was a unexpected shortfall in our inventories, we used a borescope to go into the ventilation ducting and noted the water. We then have a couple of low points that we then open up and drain points. And you noticed we had two different timings of recovery. The first one was in the easily accessible ventilation, and then the second part, roughly a month later, was in a low point that was not easy to access, and we had to do some investigative techniques with regards to how to get to the water. And in that interim, we had collected the totals that are in the EIR.
Thank you.
So this is my question. You know, the ventilation is made to remove the air, suck it, move it, recirculate, whatever. Now it's not for liquid. So how come the ventilation system was located in a position that the overflow was getting into, which is, from engineering point of view, I don't understand that, because it's supposed to make sure that the air is moving, not the liquid in the ventilation tanks, ventilation ducts.
Brock Sanderson for the record. This ventilation system is purely there for venting of the 3 dump tanks, because in the event of tripping the reactor, you open up 3 46-centimeter diameter vent lines, and you basically have a very large slug flow going into these dump tanks, and therefore you need the air to come out of the tanks. In the early days of the facility, recognizing this is roughly 60 years ago, heavy water was extremely precious, not only due to cost, but also due to availability. So in the design of this vent system, they also in the day had a heavy water recovery system, which consisted of a chiller. And so in the early days, they would take the normal evaporation that came out of the dump tanks, condense it, and collect it. And then that collected water would go into feedstock to get purified heavy water at a later date. That activity stopped roughly 25, 30 years ago due to the availability of heavy water and then the cost of operations versus the cost of buying. So the ventilation system for the dump tanks was made watertight for that purpose.
And it's located on not on a floor level, but kind of quite much lower level.
Jean
That is
Leclerc.
correct. Brock Sanderson, for the record, that is correct. The vent system is located above the dump tanks and basically at the basement level, and the dump tanks themselves are in a sub-basement.
Jean Leclerc, for the record, so I'll echo the President's comments earlier. Perhaps next time we'll have a picture and that'll speak 1,000 words. So, because I did in fact again see the installation, and the ductwork is just immediately above the dump tanks, and the 3 isolation valves are easy to see. So I'll keep that in mind for future updates to the Commission.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Velshi?
Is there any emission monitoring? And if so, I know these levels are extremely low. Would it have picked up that something abnormal is going on?
Brock Sanderson, for the record. No, there are no emission measurements coming out of the facility. There has been in the past an assessment with regards to the requirements associated with it. We are using primarily virgin heavy water, and as noted earlier by Mr. Leclerc, the tritium concentration in our heavy water actually decreases over time due to the decay of the tritium. And our facility staff for operations in the facility are not on routine tritium bioassay. However, we do have 2 individuals working in the facility that for other activities are on routine tritium bioassay, and their bioassays have shown no detectable uptakes of tritium in the history of operations of Z2.
Thank you.
So just to follow up on this, I was intrigued the way the report is mentioned that during a quarterly heavy water checks, CNL staff noted a discrepancy. Is that do they do this calculation routinely on every quarter? And is that the first time that the discrepancy was observed, or there may have been discrepancies historically which was never being paid attention to?
Jean Leclerc, for the record, so they're checking their inventories quarterly. I think again as Mr. Sanderson mentioned, the issue around the heavy water in this particular incident, a lot of it has to do with the value of the heavy water itself and not the risks associated with it. But they do quarterly verifications, and perhaps I can ask Mr. Sanderson if he can elaborate further.
Brock Sanderson, for the record. Yes, historically we do quarterly inventories, and we report those inventories to our nuclear materials accountability individuals, and so they keep a running total of the heavy water inventory in Z2 over time, since its inception.
So historically, you never detected those discrepancies?
Historically, we do detect losses due to evaporation during normal operations, and those numbers historically are roughly 20 kilograms per month that we lose due to evaporation. The number changes anywhere from 50 to 30 kilograms per month depending on the amount of operations, time of year, and absolute humidity in the air.
So this time it was way above that particular threshold. Is that what we observe?
Brock Sanderson, for the record, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Anybody, anything else? Okay, thank you very much.